I'm really excited about our next panel on food waste. In the US alone, we waste 40% of food, and in the developing world, about 1/3 of all food is wasted before it can ever reach people's stomachs. Fortunately, food loss and food waste both have a variety of solutions, and our keynote today is one of the people working on those solutions and helping galvanize young people at colleges and universities around the country to really combat food waste. Ben Simon is the founder and executive director of the Food Recovery Network, and he was recently recognized by Forbes magazine as one of their 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs. Our moderator today is Daniel Reed, the director of Planet Forward. Planet Forward is housed at the GW Center for Innovative Media and highlights innovations in sustainability from students, researchers, scientists, policymakers, and businesses. Thank you for joining us today, Dan. I want to welcome Ben Simon to the stage, who will be followed by our moderator, Dan, and our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause to encourage them to come out. We'll just wait a few more minutes. All right, thank you all again. Ben, take the stage.
All right. Let me just adjust this mic upward a lot. See if it'll stay. All right, how's everyone doing? It's not quite tall enough for me. I prepared a speech, but you know what? I'm just gonna tell it straight, guys. I'm just gonna give it to you from the heart, okay? Just gonna speak straight to you. That's why I brought my from the heart speech right here. But seriously, the question's often asked, how on earth are we gonna feed 9 billion people in the year 2050? A lot of people have different opinions, and the UN estimates that we need to increase food production by 70%. Some people think that we need to embrace insects as a form of protein. I don't want to offend anybody, but in the words of Jimmy Fallon, that's ill. I think it's gross. It's just me personally. I have a different opinion, and I think most of my friends on this food waste panel will definitely agree that while a large portion of the solution definitely has to do with increasing the amount of food that we're producing, an equal part of the solution also has to do with reducing the massive amount of food that we're currently wasting. America does not have a food shortage problem. America has a food distribution problem, which is kind of a fancy way of saying America has a food waste problem. America wastes 40% of the food that's grown. Luckily, according to the NRDC, if America were to reduce food waste by just 15%, it would actually cut hunger in half and feed 25 million Americans. So I think the question we need to be asking ourselves then is, how can we reduce food waste by 15%? There's a lot of different things that need to happen. Some of it's at the farm level, some of it's at the consumer level. What Food Recovery Network focuses on is change that needs to happen at the business level, because most businesses today are still throwing out all of their surplus food. Why are they throwing out their surplus food? It seems pretty common sense, right? You put a lot of effort into making food, you would want that food to get eaten. My theory is that these are perfectly good people operating under misinformation. If you were to approach the average restaurant manager today and ask them about food recovery, ask them to participate, which we do, they would look at you like you're crazy, which they do. And they would tell you you're crazy because, according to the information they have, if they were to donate their surplus food to you, they would get sued. But there's one big issue with that, and that's that there's this thing called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act. Can everybody say Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act? All right, thank you. We love the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act at Food Recovery Network. And the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act protects all food donors from liability. It's been around since 1996, but most people have never heard of it. And so they go on wasting their food. But furthermore, a recent report from the University of Arkansas's Food Recovery Project recently came out, and it surveyed the legal landscape and showed that there has never been a single lawsuit of anybody trying to sue a food business for donating its surplus food and participating in food recovery. And there's so many benefits at the same time of participating in food recovery. You get to feed hungry people in your community, you help the environment, and most importantly for a lot of businesses, it helps their bottom line. And that's the kicker. To me, I believe that we really need to show businesses what's in it for them. And it helps their bottom line in a few ways. First of all, simply by becoming more conscious of the food that, of the surplus food that they're generating each day, by tracking that, it starts to go down over time. With Food Recovery Network, we've seen that across the board, of these donations starting to go down, which is cost savings for them. Second, there's an enhanced tax deduction for food businesses donating their surplus food, up to double the normal cost of goods sold tax deduction. That really matters. But yet, at the same time, as I mentioned, most food businesses are still not donating their surplus food. I'll tell a quick story. At University of Maryland, when we were just starting out, the first chapter of the Food Recovery Network, we were picking up from the Panda Express Chinese food restaurant in the food court. Everything was going great. We were picking up their surplus food for a semester or two, until one day, we went to pick up the food, and the manager at Panda Express said, "I'm sorry, but we can't donate our surplus food to you anymore." We said, "Why not?" She said she had a conversation with corporate, and apparently Panda Express has a national policy of not participating in any food recovery. And they're not alone. I want to play a quick call and response game with the audience. It's called No We Don't, Yes We Do. I start off by asking a simple question to the audience, and you guys respond as an unruly mob, but a unified mob, with one of two answers, either no we don't, let's try it. No we don't. That's not unruly. Come on, guys. We need to change the food system. Say, no we don't.
No we don't.
All right, that's more unruly. That's what I like. And let's try yes we do.
Yes we do.
All right, I'm gonna ask the first question. Do we like tasty Chinese food?
Yes we do.
That's right. Do we like seeing good food go to waste?
No we don't.
That's also right. Do we think Panda Express and other large food businesses should reconsider corporate policies of not donating their surplus food?
Yes we do.
All right. And shifting industry is possible. Food Recovery Network is just one of many, many success stories of food recovery organizations recently popping up and creating change within industry. We started 3.5 years ago at University of Maryland College Park when we saw good food going to waste. And we created a very simple model of food recovery. And now, 3.5 years later, we're at 112 college campuses, including here at GW. We've donated over 600,000 pounds of food. And together with our national partner, the Campus Kitchens Project, we're on track to make food recovery, to make higher education the first sector where food recovery is actually the norm rather than the exception. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. I see you there, leading the clap. And we're really excited about that because other sectors, too, can make that same shift. So if you are involved in managing a hotel chain or a restaurant chain or a grocery store chain, please let's talk. I'll be at the conference all 2 days, and we have several other representatives from the Food Recovery Network staff here as well. Let's talk. Food Recovery Network has recently rolled out a consulting program to help food businesses who want to do the right thing, who want to embrace food recovery and either start a new food recovery program or improve upon an existing effort, build out their food recovery program capacity. And we also accredit a certification program, the first and only national certification program for food recovery. It's called Food Recovery Certified, and we recently launched it with our partners Sodexo and Bon Appetit Management Company. Food businesses are eligible to apply, pay a small certification fee, and take advantage of PR benefits. America grows enough food to feed everyone, but the system won't change itself. Everybody in this room and watching on live stream has a role to play in this, and we need everybody to get involved. Together, we can make sure that nobody goes hungry, not today, and not in the year 2050. I'd like to close with a little game we call No We Don't, Yes We Do. Because in order for this change to really happen, people need to get involved and people need to believe in it. And people need to get unruly. So, here's the question. Can we do it? Can we recover all the food? Can we reduce food waste by 15%?
Yes, we can.
All right. It's not yes we can, it's yes we do. Let's try it again. Can we do it? We got to get more unruly. I still got 15 seconds left. No, we don't. Yes, we do. Can we do it?
Yes, we do.
It should be, yes. Thanks a lot, guys.
Ben, thank you. I can't think of a better way actually to transition into this panel with such positive, optimistic remarks, and love the work you're doing with Food Recovery Network. First, on behalf of the university, I want to welcome you here. Danny told me that some folks traveled all over the world to be here, so if you're not from Washington, let me see you raise your hand. Right. Wow. Excellent. How about students? Students in the room? Terrific. Food is a big deal on this campus, and GW is kind of marking its territory here within Washington, crossing this space between policy, media, politics. So this is a terrific place to have this discussion. I'm director of the Planet Forward project here at GW, and Danny, thanks for including so many different elements of GW in some of these panels today. The Planet Forward project really is a digital storytelling collaborative. Here's my shameless plug. We're within the School of Media and Public Affairs, but what we're trying to do is engage you and everyone to be better storytellers around sustainability, around food, around the planet, because it's your ideas, it's your innovations, it's our stories that will create a movement and will create some energy around this. So that's why we've really focused the Planet Forward project topic to be around food the last couple of years. Food is the perfect lens through which to look at climate, water, energy. So it's an exciting topic. We're so glad to host you. As Ben said, we have a food waste problem, and that doesn't just go with America. That's a world problem. So I think maybe we have the most poignant topic panel through this entire summit, which no pressure there. But to that point, I just want to ask real quick, who has wasted food in the last week? So we're all guilty of it. I think one thing I hear at a lot of these events, which I assume you guys attend them as much as I do, is how can we all take a part in this? And not everybody here is going to be a food producer or a farmer, but we can all take some kind of place in the food waste discussion, which is terrific. Before we get started, just a couple of facts for those who don't understand how large the food waste problem is. And this is probably the most disturbing statistic I could find. According to the UNEP and the World Resources Institute, which both orgs are represented here on this panel, consumers in industrialized countries waste almost as much food as the entire net food production of sub-Saharan Africa. So we waste more food than an entire continent. And if food waste were a country, it would be number 3 in the world in terms of greenhouse gas outputs. So to say the least, we have a big challenge here with food waste, but I also think what's great about this panel is we're going to hear some solutions. So if I may, I'd like to introduce the panel. Sitting to my left, Brian Lipinski, who's from the World Resources Institute, Gene Busby from the United States Department of Agriculture, Mike Curtin, CEO of DCCentral Kitchen, Patricia Beneke from the UN Environment Program, Jordan Figueredo from Feedback, and Megan Stace from the Grocery Manufacturers Association. If it's okay with you guys, what I'd like to do is do 3 minutes apiece through each of you, ask a couple of questions, and then I want to open it up for a discussion. But I'm wondering if you can get us started off here, Brian. And one thing I'm hoping to, you are the lead author of an important report at World Resources Institute that's been a big player in this discussion. I'm wondering if you can help us think through the terms food waste and food loss, which are used interchangeably, but in some respects mean different things.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so you mentioned some of our facts from that paper. Globally, Ben mentioned that it's 40% waste in the US. Globally, about 33% of food by weight that is produced for human consumption does not reach human mouths. When you turn that into calories, it's about 24%. So about 1 in 4 of all food calories that are produced for humans globally don't end up reaching human mouths. So it's a big problem, but it also suggests a big opportunity. And so the way that this sort of breaks down at the global level, getting into sort of the distinction between food loss and food waste, in poorer countries in the world, in the less developed regions, you see much more of that happening closer to the farm. So it happens at production or in storage where pests get to it, or it can't reach the marketplace, or those sorts of infrastructure-related problems. Whereas when you look at richer countries like the US and countries in Europe, you get much more into restaurant waste and consumer level waste. And so that's the distinction that we make, is that food loss happens closer to the farm, where there's not really intentionality to it. It's more of these infrastructure-related problems. Whereas once you get into food waste, that's when there's an intentionality to it. I was defrosting chicken in my fridge, but then I went out to dinner and that chicken went bad. So that's sort of the distinction there between food loss and food waste. Ben mentioned the 15% reduction rate in the US would feed everybody. We are one of these organizations. We're a global research organization at the intersection of environment and development, looking at how do we feed the world in 2050. And that's how we hit on food waste as a topic to begin with, because it turns out that if we cut food waste globally by 50%, and I'm saying food waste is sort of shorthand for food loss and food waste combined, we close that 70% gap by almost a quarter. So that was a lot of percentages altogether, but it gets us about a fourth of the way there without having to convert any new land for agriculture, without having to use additional water, without having to produce more greenhouse gases to make that food. So it's more of a question of using the food that we're already producing in much smarter ways.
Gene, Brian mentioned a lot of numbers and statistics there, and at your work in the Economic Research Office at USDA, data is a big part of your job and what you do. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your work.
Sure, I'd be happy to. For the past decade or so, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service has been estimating the amount of food loss at the retail and consumer levels in the United States only, not globally. And in our case, we define food loss as the edible amount of food post-harvest that is available for human consumption but is not eaten for any reason. And so that includes moisture loss, shrinkage, like leafy greens shrinking due to moisture loss, damage from mold, pests, and inadequate climate control, as well as food waste. And we estimate that in the United States, in 2010, there was 31% of the food available for consumption, edible food that is, at the retail and consumer levels that went uneaten. And that's about 133 billion pounds. And of that 31%, 10% percentage points was at the retail level and 21 percentage points was at the consumer level. We also put a value on this food loss using national average retail prices, and we estimate that retail and consumer level losses tally up to $161.6 billion in 2010. And that's $520 per person. But if you look only at the consumer level, is $370 per person. So for a family of 4, that's about $1,480 of food that goes uneaten. We also, by the way, estimate the number of calories. We translate it into calories, and our estimate is 141 trillion calories in 2010. That's trillion with a T. And per person per day, that comes out to 1,250 calories.
Wow. So we talk a lot about food loss and really losing food that would be for human consumption, but do you guys factor in at some level nutrient loss?
That's a good question. Other than calories, we don't disaggregate into that. However, it could be done. Our sister agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, they take our core food availability data and disaggregate it into vitamins and minerals. And so with a great deal of effort, we could do that.
Mike, I see your name everywhere, and I see DCCentral Kitchen everywhere. We had some Planet Ford students come out and visit, it was Butler's Orchard, and talk about some of the apples that wouldn't have made it to market because cosmetically they were bruised, but they were perfect for your kitchen. So I'm wondering if you can share with the group more about DCCentral Kitchen model and how food loss plays into that.
Sure. So I think we're hearing a lot of wildly troubling and disturbing numbers. So let's try to look at the positive side if we can. First, I just have to pick up on something that Ben said about the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act of 1996. When Robert Egger founded DCCentral Kitchen, and yesterday was our 26th anniversary. So nothing to celebrate, something to mark. You know, we still have a long way to go, but when he started looking at this food waste as an opportunity, as opposed to the tragedy that it is, Marriott Corporation was the first company that really got behind this, and it was really their corporate heft, their legal team, their investment on Capitol Hill that facilitated that act going forward with Dan Glickman, who was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time in the Clinton administration. So that was a big piece of what we did so that this business of repurposing waste, of creating opportunity and empowerment opportunities could be replicated and taken nationwide. And so the kitchen then was based on this idea that waste is wrong. That waste could be food, it could be productive minds, it could be kitchens that weren't being used. And when we started, we were really focusing on the end of the food system, restaurants, hotels, caterers. And as you say now, we're really moving to the other end of the food system, to farms, and really focusing on food that sadly is cosmetically or geometrically or aesthetically challenged in such a way that it really has no commercial value. And my learned colleagues up here may smack me down with some of the statistics I'm about to throw out, but it's about 40 to 60% is what we've seen talking to independent growers that never makes it off the farm because it's the wrong shape or the wrong size. It doesn't fit in the right box, that fits in the right truck, that then fits in the right bin at the grocery store. Our food system is based on size and shape, not nutrition, not flavor, not taste. So what we're doing now, in addition to collecting millions of pounds, about 3 million pounds of wasted food through DCCentral Kitchen and the Campus Kitchens Project, turning that into about 2.5 million meals a year, we're purchasing about $300,000 to $400,000 a year of this cosmetically challenged food and putting that into social enterprise businesses that create economic activity and vitality here in the District of Columbia most especially. We're doing 65% of our whole budget now is based on social enterprise, locally sourced, scratch-cooked school food meals, catering, and other contract meals, using predominantly food that would be wasted, but purchasing it. So putting money into the local rural economies from southern Pennsylvania down to the Shenandoah Valley, creating jobs, mostly for men and women coming out of incarceration, which are costing us a fortune. Incarceration is bankrupting this nation. Taking folks that have battled addiction, that have been victims of abuse, people that have been chronically homeless, chronically unemployed, and since the recession in 2008 when we started this, we've created about 80 jobs, most of which are now held by this population that was also sucking money out of our economy along with this tragic food waste. So there is huge opportunity if we're smart enough, if we're clever enough, if we're creative enough, if we're courageous enough really, to take this waste and say, what can we do better? You know, to close our eyes and see with the third one, to look a little differently and say, this can happen, this can make change, and this can make our communities stronger and more vibrant.
Whenever I hear, the DCCentral Kitchen story is fascinating. I think a lot of folks in this room are familiar with it in general. The thing that disturbs me a little bit with is it's so simple. I mean, it's such a simple, good idea. As an entrepreneur, why don't we see Detroit Central Kitchen or Portland or, you know, this seems like a scalable model.
Well, it is. I was hoping you were going to say say it's common sense.
It is common sense.
There's nothing common about sense. That's what I love. I love to say. Thank you for saying.
Well, now you've got
that. So that's one of my favorite. My years in the food business has taught me that there's absolutely nothing common about sense. The kitchen was built to be replicated and scaled, and so there are about 80 community kitchens now around the country that are based on our model. We're expanding it, as Ben mentioned, in conjunction with Food Recovery Network through the Campus Kitchens project across the country. We share our model with people all over the country and around the world who want to do this. So it is out there, and it's built to be scaled or put into work the way it best works for the community. So we're not going to do Detroit Central Kitchen or Philadelphia or Baltimore or Buffalo. But we will absolutely want to help people to do those kinds of projects in their communities.
Plus, you get Anthony Bourdain to show up to your event. So
Tony's awesome.
If Danny and I can chat later about how...
And Tommy Colicchio, who's just here,
right.
too. He's been...
Terrific. Patricia, I think a lot of us know about the name UN Environment Program, but not quite clear on what the objective is, especially around food waste.
Okay. Well, you've already said this morning that food is a big deal on the GW campus. Mm-hmm. Well, food is a big deal with the United Nations, and it's also a big deal with the United Nations Environment Program. I see one of my colleagues here from the Food and Agriculture Organization. We have many programs and organizations within the UN that focus on food and food issues. Very important stuff. A word about UNEP, since you said that many people have heard of UNEP, but maybe aren't quite sure about the mission. We are the environmental authority of the United Nations. We work this year very closely with our colleagues at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I know you had mentioned that it would be helpful to underscore the importance of food waste in the climate change arena. I understand, and again, people here can slam me down with their facts because some of you are into the detail of the statistics, but I understand that food ends up being the #1 item in our landfills. And when it decomposes, it generates methane, which is essentially a greenhouse gas on steroids. I mean, a very potent greenhouse gas. So food waste does make a significant contribution. You stole my thunder with your statistic about if food waste were a nation, it would be number what, 3?
3.
In the world in terms of emissions. And everybody in the United States focuses very much, and rightfully so, on electricity generation as a source of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, if you take the upper end of the estimates of what food waste emits, it comes pretty darn close to the electricity sector in terms of CO2 emissions. So that's a big deal. The other reason that UNEP is very engaged on this issue is not only from a climate perspective, but other resources. Our land resources, our water resources. Producing food creates uses natural resources. And so wasting food wastes natural resources. And that is something that we're very mindful of. UNEP has a big program on sustainable consumption and production. And an important component of that program is addressing food waste on the consumption end. I run the regional office for North America for UNEP. We're right here in Washington, and we've picked just a handful of issues that we really want to try to elevate and focus on in North America. And one of them is food waste. North Americans have a problem with food waste. At the same time, we also have, maybe you have a different panel on this, we have an obesity epidemic going on in North America. a third of adults, according to the Center for Disease Control, are obese in this country. So you kind of have to think about how all of this interrelates, and I think there are many ways to go about tackling this. We're working closely with our friends at the World Resources Institute on some of these issues, but I hope that the panel can have a discussion about how we can go about dealing with some of this as well.
Terrific.
Anyway, thank you for the invitation today.
Sure. I love the climate change connection to this. I don't actually love it, but I think it's important to bring it into the fold because I don't think a lot of people hear food waste and immediately start thinking about greenhouse gas output or climate. So I'd love to come back with that a little bit later. Jordan, we loosely throw around in this whole food space this feeding the 9 billion, which can be a little ambiguous. What is feeding the 5,000?
Yes, so I'm going to do something a little different here. Let me go move this up. That might help. Yeah, so I'm going to tell a little story about feeding the 5,000 Oakland. So I come from a zero waste industry background, the Bay Area, and more I was noticing people were interested in food recovery and prevention, but not doing so much. So I was really kind of bugged about that. And after our big conference last March, which I co-chaired, that was the hot topics of the conference. Not recycling, not different parts of recycling or reuse. It was food recovery and food waste prevention. So I knew the time was ripe for change. Lots of food puns, right? Yeah. All right. So I saw a trailer for Just Eat It. And in that trailer, it's actually a really cute movie with this couple that eats out of dumpsters for 6 months to sort of raise awareness. They're in Vancouver. And then, so in that movie, I saw Tristram Stewart, this British guy, eloquent as bloody hell, talking about food waste. And I was like, okay, I'm getting this guy's book, I'm reading it. I read his book, completely floored me. Totally exposed the global food waste scandal, part of the title of the book. And also, they've been doing these events called Feeding the 5,000, feeding thousands of people in a public square food that would have been wasted. So inspired and on a mission, I contacted Dana Gunders at NRDC, one of our food waste heroes, and convinced her and the filmmakers of Just Eat It to do a one-day event talking about higher solutions to food waste. So the good, positive, higher solutions that work, that one-day event. So after planning it, talking with lots of people, recruiting people, it went from regional to several days, 15 states, 5, 6 different countries. Jonathan Bloom called it the Woodstock of food waste. Yeah, it just kept blowing up because so many people want to do something about this, and even recyclers want to do something about this. So I kept thinking, this is great, this is going so well, but we've got to get Tristram here. We've got to have a Feeding the 5,000 with all these people involved. So I convinced Dana that I wasn't entirely nuts to take on another new project. We connected with Tristram, and of course he was thrilled. He wanted to have the first Feeding the 5,000 in the US in the Bay Area with the mecca of hippies and viros and unofficial dumpster or bin inspectors. Sorry, yeah. And so I started planning with his staff, Dominica, who was amazing, and then funding came in from NRDC and Sustainable America and Grace Communications 2 months before we had our event. And so we really had a lot of work to get done. There was working with the city, allaying fears of an Occupy Oakland 2014 wasted food fight, people throwing food everywhere. So that went over well. And then site planning, equipment, tents, DJ, chefs, there was just so much to coordinate. And also because Feeding the 5,000 was new to the US and Oakland is really quiet on the weekend, attendance was really all on us. So we had some nice web articles, but I only had one interview. It was with a Spanish radio station, and I don't speak Spanish. So I think they made me sound good. It was happy, it was upbeat, yeah. But social media was huge. Michael Pollan, I was lucky enough to convince him and Alice Waters to post and tell people to come to our event. It just flooded it, and everybody shared, and it was amazing. We also, of course, a week or so, Michael Pollan also was so kind with Tristram's ridiculous charm. Tristram is amazing, could charm anybody. He talked to Michael Pollan and convinced him to do a new food rule on food waste. So he published Food Rule 84 in honor of Feeding the 5,000 Oakland. It was called Take Back Your Plate. So that was really amazing. And then, of course, a week or so before, we have lots of fires to put out, all kinds of things to organize, no permits, no breads, no sound equipment. But it all came together because there was so much help and support. The event was absolutely amazing. We had, of course, our funding partners. We had other great in-kind partners like St. Vincent de Paul, who donated the space to store the 11,000 pounds of food, cooked the delicious carrot, onion, and sweet potato soup. We had Food Shift, who coordinated volunteers, got some extra funding, and had the really important dancing banana people at the event. We also had People's Grocery, a food justice organization, who blended smoothies. They threw all of it in there, so strawberries with the top, greens with veg. People loved it. Oaklandish was amazing. They designed our logo, donated hats, T-shirts, everything. Northern California Recycling Association helped with volunteers and everything. There's World Centric donated 6,000 sets of compostables. Recology donated recycling and organics. Stop Waste helped with funding and meeting space. The speakers were off the charts, of course. Excuse me. We had Tristan Stewart, Robert Egger, Dana Gunders, Jonathan Bloom, and of course Rob Greenfield, the environmental legend, jumping out of a garbage cart to speak. We had to have that. And then thanks to Ron Clark and Better Harvest and farmers, they donated 9,000 pounds of 2 large sweet potatoes, scratch squash, slightly bruised apples, crooked carrots, and big onions, in addition to 2,000 more pounds that went into the soup and the smoothies. And all of it would have gone to waste, but all of it was eaten, and eaten by folks who otherwise may not have thought of eating food that would be wasted. So all of that together was no doubt this food waste geek's dream come true, pretty much, and a brilliant start to the US food waste revolution. Free lunch to fight food waste.
Terrific. You are a food waste geek.
I am.
I love it. Megan, we've talked through this panel about farm level food waste. We've talked about consumer. Can you talk to us a little bit more about retail level? We haven't really heard that perspective, and kind of the role that the industry plays in the whole food waste discussion.
Sure. So, hi everybody. I'm Megan Stas. I'm with the Grocery Manufacturers Association. So that catchy acronym is the trade association here in DC that represents the major food and CPG brands. So we're the Crafts and the ConAgras and the Procter & Gamble's. And I am sort of out of zippy food waste facts because I'm last. I also didn't bring a flag, so I'm feeling a little like I need to step up my food waste game here. But I'm here on behalf of something called the Food Waste Reduction Alliance, which is a cross-industry effort that was formed in 2011 between GMA, so all the major food brands, food and beverage brands, FMI, which is the association that represents retail grocery stores, and the National Restaurant Association. And we banded together in a pretty unique way, like I said, about 4 years ago, to address the challenge of food waste in our supply chain. And we came to that issue because we were doing some other sustainability work that affects each of our industries, and we started digging into EPA's landfill data here in the US. And we saw what Patricia mentioned, which is that the single biggest piece of what goes into our landfills in the United States is food. And so here we are, the food industry, and we were saying, whoa, why isn't anybody talking about this? You know, what can we do? What should we be doing? You know, what are the benchmarks that we need to be working on? You know, what are the solutions that we need to be advancing? So we got together. We have about 8 companies from each of our respective industries that make up the FWRA. It's currently co-chaired by ConAgra, Wegmans, and Wendy's. And we look at getting better data around how much food waste is being generated in our section of the supply chain, as well as how much food is being donated. We're really lucky to be partnering with Feeding America, who I know Karen Hanner's here from Feeding America in the audience. They're the world's, soon to be the world's, if not the world's actually, the country's certainly largest network of food banks. So we wanted to get better data on how much food waste is being generated, how much food is being donated. We wanted to look at what are the best practices that we can be advancing, right? Who's got the solutions that we can bring to scale? And what are the public policy pieces that really are working around the United States in terms of advancing infrastructure? And then in terms of, we do a lot of work around stakeholder building and partnerships. You know, we want to be talking to the right people, which is why I'm so familiar with so many folks on this stage. So we've been working for, like I said, about 4 years. We've seen some really tremendous innovations. We've seen some really tremendous improvements. We, as an industry, take this very, very seriously. Food waste is a major issue for us. And we're looking at all sorts of different solutions. So Dan, to answer your kickoff question, we're really looking at how can we get our own houses in order as these 3 industries, right, as manufacturing, restaurant, and retail. And then, how do we how do we talk to consumers about buying ugly fruit and vegetables, right? How do we change our packaging so that we can help keep food fresher longer, right? So that the bag of arugula that is admittedly sitting in my crisper and going not great because I went out to dinner a bunch of times this weekend, what can we do as a manufacturing industry to improve that packaging to make it sit in my crisper a little longer so I'll eat it, won't throw it away. So we're doing a lot of work around best practices and innovation and especially around collaboration, and I'm happy to talk about that more.
So when the Reduction Alliance started just 4 years ago, did you guys set benchmarks, or do you have benchmarks now? Like, what does 5 years look like from now? What's success? Is it a 30% reduction?
We don't have a quantitative goal yet. The 3 goals of the Food Waste Reduction Alliance right now are reduce the amount of food waste that's being generated, period, right? So some of you might be familiar with the US EPA's food waste hierarchy. It's an inverted pyramid. The very top, right, so what US EPA says we should do, which we agree with, is source reduce, right? We shouldn't be generating food waste as much as we possibly can. So that's a major goal of ours. The second is to increase the amount of food that is being donated in the United States. We're so lucky to have the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act in the United States. No other developed country has that. And as a result, our food donation numbers are really high, but they can be better. We can do more there. And then third, for food waste that is unavoidable, let's find environmentally and economically beneficial alternatives to landfill, right? So maybe that's anaerobic digestion, maybe that's composting. But for us, we need to figure out what works in different parts of the country and build up that infrastructure and get alternatives to landfill for our store managers, our plant managers, our restaurant managers, so that we all have better decisions to make, better opportunities.
Are expiration dates creating food waste?
We don't know. So we get that question a lot. We know that there's a lot of consumer confusion around the date that's on your can or box.
Because I'm always scared when it says, my milk's run out. I go, uh-oh, it might explode.
Yeah. So that's something we're working on. There's a lot of different language that's stamped along with that date. Basically, what those dates mean, there's a couple. There's a code between the manufacturer and the retailer for stocking and shelf life. But then there's also one that's consumer readable that basically, that's that best by date, and that says that after this date, the quality may not be what you would expect from that brand's product, right? Or the vitamins that we list on the nutrition panel might not be what are on that panel, right? So they are the regulations around them vary state to state, and we know that it's something that causes consumer confusion. But the thing about food waste is, despite the fact that we've all been talking about it a lot for the past several years, is we still don't have great data about what's getting thrown away and why, right? We know that it's a lot. We've heard all these huge statistics, but we still don't actually know what are consumers throwing away in their home, and why is that, right? Is it just because they bought too much? Is it because they don't want to eat their leftovers? Like, that's the piece that I think for us is the next big nut to crack in terms of solutions.
So I want to open it up a little bit. And on the data point, the NRDC has an issue paper, Wasted. It's a very popular report in the food waste discussion, but it recommends that the US government should conduct a comprehensive study of losses and then set national goals for waste reduction. And since we have someone here from the USDA, I'm wondering if you can comment on the whole idea of the US government setting a reduction goal. Is that something we should be doing? Are we in the process of getting there?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that measuring food waste is really, really difficult. I mean, when you consider all the different kinds of food that we consume and available for consumption, and you think about all the different places where food can go astray from farm to fork. We could have food loss on the farm, during transportation, in processing plants, supermarkets, homes, restaurants, sporting events, and so forth. It's really tough to measure. And part of the reason why it's so tough to measure is that it can be really expensive to measure it, to do it correctly. And another thing is that there's a lack of incentives to really measure it for individual firms and individuals in general. And so it's a real challenge, and that's why we can't estimate it on the farm level and farm to retail level. So far, our estimates only focus on the retail and consumer level so far. To my knowledge, but it would be great in principle to have a baseline and then be able to see how much progress you're making over time.
Brian, you're a data guy. How would that impact your work at World Resources Institute?
Well, that's something we're working on right now with UNEP and a number of other partners, is trying to create what we're calling the Food Loss and Waste Protocol. That's a really exciting name. We're a think tank.
It's very Washington.
And so that's what we're trying to do, is take a global look at this and make sure that everyone's talking about the same thing when they're talking about food waste. Megan talked a little bit about that food waste hierarchy. I think when you say the term food waste, most people immediately leap to dumpsters full of fruits and vegetables and bread and just perfectly good food. But depending on who you're talking to, some people would consider, if that food ends up being diverted to animal feed, that that's still waste. Others would not consider that waste. Some would call anaerobic digestion of food waste. Others would say that that's not waste. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is develop sort of a quantification tool that will allow governments and businesses to measure the food waste that's happening within their own jurisdictions, and then make sure that everyone is talking about the same thing. So, for example, I was at a conference where someone said that in Japan they waste 5% of their food. And I was like, wow, what does Japan do that's so great? But it was actually just that 5% of it goes to landfill. So that's not really comparable to numbers that come out from other sources. So as Jean said, it is quite a challenge, but it's something that hopefully we're getting a little bit closer to coordinating people enough so that these data collection measures that can then inform reduction, which is the important thing, to make smarter, to direct your attention toward where you're going to be able to make the most impact. And so that's what our goal is to sort of do the wonky side of it, the things called food loss and waste protocol that then help to get the actual reduction efforts, the information that they need.
I keep hearing the words dumpster, landfill. I'm a communication and a words guy, so I kind of just want to pose this question to you guys. Is waste really the wrong word? Because I think at some level waste kind of implies a sanitation issue. And in some regards, especially for Mike, your work, this is not a sanitation issue. You're talking about recovery, you're talking about repurposing food that may not have looked good on a grocery store shelf but is nutritious.
Yeah, I think the language is always important. And to be fair, I think when we started DCCentral Kitchen 26 years ago, there was more of that perception of the food we were using was coming out of restaurant kitchens that weren't being used, out of hotel kitchens, out of caterers' kitchens. But again, I think the more tragic and the insidious waste is food that is just not getting off the farms, that is really, really good product, that we just haven't developed the distribution mechanism, particularly with independent, small to medium family-sized farms, to capture the way we have with large agribusiness. A lot of this stuff, you go to a grocery store, you get tomato sauce, apple juice, all those things. These are being made with these aesthetically challenged, geometrically challenged products, but the bulk of the American farmer, the independent farmers, don't have that ability. So what we're trying to do is create that infrastructure as best we can and share that with others around the country so they can capture, again, completely good, healthy, delicious food that is just can't find its way to the system the way it's designed right now.
Jordan, you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, and of course playing my Berkeley Bay Area activist role here, that we do get caught up in our numbers too much and facts that, frankly, they can bore the general public. So I think part of it is also just making the stories more engaging and inviting, like having events to feed people food that would have been wasted, is not waste, but would have been wasted. Or celebrating stories like DCCentral Kitchen. Mike's very humble, but DCCentral Kitchen, while they have piloted the model, there's no one like DCCentral Kitchen, but there should be. There should be more of those positive stories around the country. Or celebrating food for all of its beauty, like ugly fruit and veg. It's, there's 20 to 40% or maybe even 60% of food going to waste that plenty of people would love to have, or they think it's pretty fun that food looks different. I mean, it's American, right? So I think it's creating citizen demand or citizen interest in all of this, not just giving them facts, which are important too, facts, and people are hungry and we're wasting so much, but how do we bring them in? Tell the stories, and of course, stories.
Haddie.
Well, I guess I'm a lawyer, not a communications person, but I do really like the term waste, because to me it brings up wastefulness, and I think it underscores the fact that in North America and many places around the world, we're not consuming sustainably, and we need to be. I also want to say I'm really glad there are people like this that are out there doing, the more demonstrative piece of this. Our colleagues at WRI and our colleagues in our UNEP offices around the globe are working on the data and the information. And time and time again, I guess coming at issues from an environmental perspective as well, the science, the data, the information just has to be there for these good policy choices to be made. And I actually am pretty encouraged by the amount of data and information that's already out there, thanks to people, at USDA, at the Economic Research Service, at EPA and elsewhere. But having that solid data behind us, the factoids may be a little dull at times, but it's very important to the overall objective, I think.
We've got about 10 minutes here to open it up to your questions here in the room, and if anybody's following on Twitter, to do questions that way. Is somebody walking around with a mic that we can use? Regardless. How about right here?
Good afternoon. Vicki Rapp, Food Chat Radio. You've talked a lot about the statistics. Can anyone offer up some suggestions on how we can marry those individuals that are on the front lines with more commercial operations similar to DC Kitchen or other types of productions where you can now take that food waste and turn it into commercial product and get those commercial entities funded? Because as most people know that are trying to start food-related businesses, you cannot go to venture capitalists to get funded on it. It is extremely difficult to find it, and there are very few, and if there are some I've missed, programs that I've seen government-wise that would assist those kinds of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, so in my zero waste day job, I've been noticing, and part of the forum I organize, is that people around the country want to use funds to support food recovery and prevention. Recyclers, diverting funds that were for recycling to these programs. And it's a matter of our system, right? We have food banks, we have food rescue groups, amazing food recovery networks. They pick up food for free, but we'll throw it away and pay somebody. That has to completely change. I mean, unless that changes, yeah, we're always going to have this issue. But people are starting to get there, but that's where we need to go, is to pay people for recovering good food, which is a benefit that's just multitudes above dumping it in a composter or a garbage bin. It's just, yeah, paying people is really painful.
Megan, to that point, I'm curious what the retail industry might be able to do to...
Yeah. There's a tremendous demand for partnership, right? I mean, it's why groups like Feeding America are so successful, right? Because they're this huge national network of food banks and food pantries. So you have sort of a centralized organization to call if you're a store manager in, Tampa, Florida, and you want to do something with your food waste. But there's, or with your excess food that's not going to get sold. There's so much demand for those partnerships, and the other tricky thing about this is that every community is very, very different, right? The solution that works at that one particular grocery store is not in Tampa, is not necessarily the same one that works at my Giant and Shaw, right? I mean, they're very, very different working environments. The labor costs are different. Your space costs are different. So we are really trying to figure out how to scale up and advance some of these partnerships that we know work on the ground. To figure out, how can we replicate these? Who's doing this really well, and how do we replicate that in more places around the country? But it still is, in a lot of ways, a one-off sort of person-to-person, network community. This is the answer here in our super urban community or our super rural community, right? I mean, those realities on the ground are really different. But there's huge demand for those partnerships at the business level, restaurant, retail, manufacturer, all of them. We want to donate as much safe, nutritious food as we possibly can.
Go ahead. Please state your name, organization too.
I'm Nabiha Kazi with Humanitas Global. I run this development organization, so my question is more globally oriented, and perhaps Megan, you could comment, but certainly welcome feedback from the rest of the panelists. If we talk about the food system and where it's going, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Caribbean will overwhelmingly be feeding that food system. And we know that these are regions that have high burdens of hunger and malnutrition. Food waste in these regions is not a dumpster issue, it's a supply chain issue. 40% of 40% of food waste in developing countries is because of post-harvest losses or transportation, packaging, whereas 40% in Western countries has to do with consumer and retail waste. So I'm curious, what are some of the learnings, what are some of the efforts currently underway to look at improving the situation in developing countries where, again, these countries are going to be feeding the world?
Patty.
Well, I know that one of the things that UNEP has been working on and looking at is the problem of refrigeration in many parts of the developing world. And I think innovation is going to play a big role in addressing some of the concerns that you raise. And one area would be coming up with some new and innovative ways to keep food cold when it needs to be cold. I think the transportation and infrastructure is another area, obviously, that is very difficult to tackle, but people are trying to come up with new approaches on how to address that, and probably not just from a food waste perspective, but from more of a generic societal, economic, and social perspective. So all the statistics that you stated are very much in line with what I'm familiar with, and I think that there are people out there working on it, but it's going to take a while.
Jordan.
And to that end of people working on it, Tristram Stewart and Feedback, the organization I'm volunteering for, so they actually worked with a bean farmer in Kenya to make sure that they changed the way they grow and the way they process beans, because the beans were cut to a certain size. And so they would waste 20–40% of the bean or whatever it was, my numbers are bad, because the bean doesn't know it's supposed to grow to a certain size. He always says that, right? The bean grows to a certain size, but they'd pack them in a package. So they worked with a bean farmer, and it saved them some ridiculous number, like 20% of their costs. And if you apply that to every bean farmer, the impacts are huge, not only for saving the food that would have been wasted, but also cost effectiveness too. So there are lots of solutions, even in the developing world. It's not just us talking about here too.
Brian.
Yeah, just to sort of pick up on what Patty was saying, in a lot of ways, good development generally will in turn lead to less food loss close to the farm. But right now, even as food waste rises as an issue in consciousness, when we found a survey of agricultural projects funded by your World Banks and your other big development organizations, 95% of the agricultural funding went toward production-oriented. Only 5% of that funding goes toward what happens to the food after it is grown. And that's an imbalance that really needs to be corrected.
I'd like to share on the Planet Forward website, planetforward.org. We have a terrific video from 2 MIT students who started something called Promethean Power. And their idea was to create a solar-powered refrigerator that would prevent dairy loss in India because of the rampant power outages. So I think there's a lot of cool ideas like that, and invite you to, another shameless plug, check out our website and think about that. Let's get a question from this side of the room. How about over here in the glasses?
Hi, I'm Eric Olson. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We've done some work on food waste. I guess my question goes to maybe to Megan and others. One of the issues we did a report on is the we called it the dating game. And industry's own data suggests that the vast majority of consumers are confused by the dates on labels. That drives a lot of consumer waste. The consumers, according to industry's own estimates, the vast majority do throw away things, even though they're probably perfectly good. So I'm wondering where the industry is on trying to standardize the language on these labels. And I'm curious as to whether there are either policy solutions to that or industry voluntary solutions to that problem. And then whether there are other policy impediments that may be blocking progress in anybody's mind. For example, to donations, we know about the Good Samaritan law, but are there other policy impediments? I'm curious if the panel has any thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tackle the dating one again just very quickly because we already talked about it a little bit, but we are working on it. So the most of the information dating and the date stamped on packages is between the manufacturer and the retailer, and then there's this consumer readable one as well, which we know consumers are confused about. So GMA and FMI are working to figure out what we should do, right? But the first piece of that is, well, where are we trying to get, right? What's the problem that we are trying to solve, right? Is that we need to, do people look at this and think it's a food safety thing? Do they think just throw it away? We need to understand sort of what the right endpoint is to get to before we can come up with the right solution, right? Because we're not going to sort of change the labeling that's stamped on there if that's not going to solve the problem. So first we have to figure out what consumers are confused about, what they actually want, and then make changes industry-wide. But we are working on it. We know that it's important. But we still, again, it's sort of this issue of we still don't really know what's getting thrown away in consumers' homes, right? We know anecdotally, everybody's got the story of the salad dressing or the salsa that got pitched, but we still don't know yet. So we're working on it, but we want to if we're going to make a change, we want it to be the right one.
We've got a little less than 5 minutes left, so I do need to get to an online question. This comes from Susan Murray. And is Ben in the room still? This is a good question for you. If a college uses a competitor of Sodexo to provide food service, would that prevent them from being certified with the Food Recovery Network?
No. No, it absolutely wouldn't. We work with all dining service providers as well as independents. And the certification program is actually different from Food Recovery Network, which picks up from college campuses. The certification program is actually for all food businesses in America, whether it's a grocery store or a restaurant or a college campus, airport, anything. So, yeah.
Got a couple more questions here on this side. Let's do right here on the end.
Bruce Rubin. I was just curious, where do the people who have solutions that are getting the 5% of the funding go to find that funding to launch a solution to post office loss?
I'm not sure I totally understand your question.
We have a product that can save,
He's speaking to the mic, please.
Sorry. We've developed a product that's aimed at post office loss, and I'm aware of the 95-5 ratio, and I was just wondering, where does the 5% reside?
Yeah, that 5% is specifically referring to big multilaterals, so things like the World Bank and the IMF. So I'm not sure so much how that would play out in terms of things like venture capital. I don't know if there are statistics around that. Sorry.
How about I invite you two to get together over lunch? We'll chat that way. I want to leave you guys with a question. We talked so much today about how much food we're wasting. We talked a lot about, how dismal it really is. But where are things supposed to be 5 years from now? What are some of the innovations we need to achieve less food waste? And I think going beyond just forgetting that we put leftovers in a Ziploc and leaving it in the fridge. We need to get beyond that. So I kind of open it up to you guys to offer where are some of those success stories happening, some of the work you're seeing, and what really should we be, if we were to get together for this panel 5 years from now, what would we be talking about differently if everything works out well?
I think from one of the things that I think we're seeing a lot of, and I think a lot of it's probably due to Kathleen's work at the USDA, is a great deal of interest in food hubs and really bringing together urban and rural communities in a very productive way that not only reduce waste, but to create jobs, creates economy, and has incredible health benefits by increasing access, affordable access to healthy food in food deserts, in both, again, in rural and urban environments. So I think these integrated food hubs, and there's a lot of discussion now about what is a food hub and who's a food hub. We're very proud that we are the only USDA certified food hub in the District of Columbia. And I think that's just because of the tremendous amount of product we bring in, process, and then put back out in the food stream. But when you bring people together, so there's aggregators, there's processors, there's incubator kitchens, so they're offering opportunities for food entrepreneurs. There's job training programs. There's industrial kitchens that can do meals on wheels to get in front of the senior hunger issue that we're facing. This is bearing down on us as a country, and we don't have a solution. We can get healthier food into schools. We can get more cut value-added product into corner stores in the city's food deserts. To really expand on a lot of that work, I think that distribution and that linking of urban and rural in these integrated food hubs, I think is wildly important for the future.
Jordan, quickly.
So something really simple is getting the ugly fruit and veg to the stores. We talked about it. I mean, we don't sell it anywhere here except the tiny little stores, but people love funny looking, weird looking fruit. Carrots that look like people and bananas that look like butts. I mean, people love that. They do. But we've got to get that in stores and sell it because so much is going to waste on the farm and people have no idea. But we've got to make a bigger issue out of it. That's
all right. I'd like to give a round of applause to our panel.